I'm going to make some enemies here, but if you need a drink in order to relax, in my mind, you don't actually have control over your nervous system.
Wow.
Alcohol's main effect is to reduce the amount of activity in the forebrain, which is involved in planning and inhibiting. It's involved in the no-goes,
Right?
right? It's also involved in the sense of self and your self-image, who you think you are in the world. It's kind of interesting. So when people have a drink or two, they feel less inhibited. They also, at least at the early stages of drinking, they tend to feel more confident. They tend to continue drinking, then they tend to lose their self-image. They forget who they are. They can even go blackout drunk.
Wow.
And the downstream chemicals are interesting. For a small, maybe 8% of the population, alcohol causes a huge dopamine increase. These are the people that from the first drink, they discover that they are an alcoholic or very prone to alcoholism. Some people use alcohol as a way to reduce that level of alertness slightly and get into kind of a groove where they can, focus a little better than they would otherwise. Ideally, you would know how to do that without the alcohol, but a lot of people use alcohol for that reason.
Okay.
I'm going to make some enemies here, but I have family members who will say, I need a drink. People will say, I need a drink. That is a sign of somebody that can't regulate their nervous system, right? Like, I need a cup of coffee and I'm not being disparaging of these statements. I've said I need a cup of coffee, but what you're really saying is that your system requires this chemical to get a lift. It's not a crime for most people, but if you need a drink in order to relax, in my mind, you don't actually have control over your nervous system.
Wow.
One of the really bad effects of alcohol, but that's extremely well documented, is the fact that alcohol, because of this toxicity of acetaldehyde and related pathways, can alter DNA methylation. It can alter gene expression. That can be many things in different tissues, but it is associated with a significant increase in cancer risk, in particular breast cancer, and in particular because breast tissue is present in both males and females, but in males, accelerated or abnormal conversion of testosterone to estrogen can actually lead to growth of the breast tissue in males, so-called gynecomastia, or other effects of high estrogen, or I should say of altered testosterone estrogen ratios, because that's really what's important. And these can include things like diminished sex drive, increased fat storage, and a number of other things that I think most people would find to be negative effects. In women, it's especially vulnerable to some of the DNA methylation changes. Well, breast cancer in women has a relationship to alcohol intake, and alcohol intake has a relationship to breast cancer in women. In fact, there has been proposed to be anywhere from 4 to 13% increase in risk of breast cancer for every 10 grams of alcohol consumed. How much is 10 grams? Well, in the US, one beer, which generally is 12 ounces, if it's in a bottle, one glass of wine or a shot of liquor tends to include about 10 to 12 grams of alcohol. Now I'd like to talk about a fairly common phenomenon, which is post-alcohol consumption malaise, also referred to as hangover. Hangover is a constellation of effects ranging from headache to nausea to what's sometimes called hangxiety, which is anxiety that follows a day of drinking. Hangxiety, I think we can understand physiologically if we think about that process of alcohol intake increasing the amount of cortisol and the ratio of cortisol to some other stress hormones. That well explains why some people wake up the day after or even the day after a night drinking and feel anxious and not well and stressed for reasons they don't understand. Now, the other aspects of hangover, such as the stomach ache or headache or feelings of malaise or fogginess, those can be related to a number of different things and probably are related to a number of different things. First of all, the sleep that one gets after even just one glass of wine or a beer is not the same sleep that you get when you don't have alcohol circulating in your system. And not trying to be a downer here, but this was discussed in the Huberman Lab podcast episode where I had Dr. Matthew Walker from UC Berkeley on. And of course, Dr. Walker is a world expert in sleep, runs one of the preeminent laboratories studying sleep and its effects. wrote the incredible book, Why We Sleep, and so on. Dr. Walker told me, and it certainly is supported by lots and lots of quality peer-reviewed studies in animals and in humans, that when alcohol is present in the brain and bloodstream, that the architecture of sleep is disrupted. Slow wave sleep, deep sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep, all of which are essential for getting a restorative night's sleep, are all disrupted. So for those of you that are drinking a glass or two of wine or having a hard liquor drink or a beer in order to fall asleep, the sleep you're getting is simply not high quality sleep, or certainly not as high quality as the sleep you'd be getting if you did not have alcohol in your system. Not just heavy alcohol consumption of 12 to 24 or more drinks per week, but also light to moderate alcohol consumption of any type, wine, beer, spirits, etc., does reduce the thickness of the brain. It really does reduce cortical thickness. In fact, it actually scales with the amount of alcohol that people drink. And this has been well documented in a number of different studies. I can provide a link to several of these. One of the more striking ones actually shows that there's almost a dose-dependent increase in shrinkage of the gray matter volume and in these white matter tracts, these axons, these wires as it would. So again, probably the best amount of alcohol to drink would be 0 glasses per week or ounces per week. For those of you drinking low amounts of alcohol, make sure you're doing other things to promote your health. And for those of you that are drinking moderate, and certainly for those of you that are heavy drinkers, please do everything you can to move away from that and to quit entirely. But even for the moderate consumers of alcohol, you are going to want to be aware of some of the negative health effects and do things to offset those if indeed you're not going to stop drinking or reduce your intake.